low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Patty Young, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Tuesday, June 23rd issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. UK Prime Minister Starmer quits amid Labour Party revolt. Burnham is set to become the country's sixth Prime Minister in just 7 years. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said Monday he would step down following a rebellion in his Labour Party, clearing the way for Andy Burnham, a left-wing former mayor, to likely become the country's sixth Prime Minister in 7 years. Speaking outside Downing Street, Starmer said he would quit as Labour leader, but stay on as Prime Minister to ensure an orderly transition to his successor, a process that could be completed by mid-July. Starmer's decision comes days after Burnham was elected to Parliament on a promise to launch a leadership challenge to oust Starmer and shake up the Labour Party, which is trailing anti-immigration party Reform UK in public opinion polls. The question my party is asking now is whether I am best placed to lead us into the next general election, Starmer said. I have heard the answer of my parliamentary party to that question, and I accept the answer with good grace. British politics has become increasingly unstable in the past decade, starting with the 2016 vote for Brexit that showed new fault lines over issues such as globalization and immigration that started to crack the traditional Labour Conservative domination of the past century. A succession of shocks, Brexit, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, together with weak economic growth and a surge in immigration, has left many voters disenchanted. Over the weekend, Labour lawmakers ratcheted up pressure on Starmer to make way for Burnham to avoid a protracted intra-party war. Burnham confirmed on Monday he would run for the job, pledging a positive process of renewal for our party and our country. Under Labour rules, any lawmaker can challenge the Prime Minister by getting the support of at least a fifth of party lawmakers. While someone else could challenge Burnham, he is widely expected to get the job uncontested. Burnham's main rival, former Health Secretary Wes Streeting, said Monday he wouldn't run against him. If no one else stands, Burnham would likely be ushered into Downing Street by mid-July. Starmer's demise is a remarkable turn for a country that has seen its share of political turnover in recent years, and a first for Labour, which has never ousted one of their own leaders during their first term in power, especially one that is less than 2 years into a 5-year term. But growing numbers of Labour lawmakers felt that keeping Starmer would lead to a wipeout in the next general election in 2029, and that Burnham, who polls much better with voters, gives them their best shot at keeping their jobs and fending off reform and its leader, Nigel Farage. Burnham tried and failed twice to become Labour leader in 2010 and 2015. He was, until recently, the mayor of Greater Manchester, the UK's second most populous metro region, overseeing a budget of £3 billion, equivalent to about $3.97 billion. Now, in the space of a few weeks, he is set to lead the world's fifth largest economy, with a budget of about £1.4 trillion. Investors are watching for signs that Burnham will try to increase borrowing or raise taxes, which are at a post-war high, as a percentage of the UK's economy, as the government seeks to pay for social programs and is under pressure to boost military spending. He has talked up the idea of business-friendly socialism and spoken of the need to decentralize power from London, have greater public control over utilities, and re-industrialize left-behind regions of the UK. In the past few weeks, he has tilted toward the center, pledging to abide by the current government's fiscal rules, and said he would stick with the government's approach to cutting immigration levels. Burnham would inherit an economy blighted by low productivity, increasing state spending, rising borrowing costs, and an aging population. The future labor leader will have to take the fight to Farage, who has promised to fix what he calls a broken Britain. A key issue in immigration, legal and illegal migration soared to record levels after Brexit, in part after the UK made it easier for non-European migrants to enter the country. Labour tightened the rules, but Farage has made political hay by saying Labour won't go far enough to stop people from entering the country. Like the rest of Europe, the UK's traditional parties are being challenged by new parties and populists of all stripes. Reform has picked up support from the Tories' middle class and Labour's working class bases, while the populist Greens have hurt Labour among urban leftists. Across Europe, leaders are seeing their worst poll ratings in decades. Burnham's supporters said that the 56-year-old is a savvy communicator who can better sell Labour and take on Farage. Burnham's springboard to power comes after winning a recent special district election in Makerfield, where he beat the Reform candidate handily in what his supporters said is proof he is man to take on Farage. But the district is a small sample, just 77,000 voters. That could lead to pressure on Labour to call a general election ahead of 2029 if he proves unpopular. Starmer, elected with the second largest parliamentary majority since World War II, had vowed to fight any leadership challenge, but he was pressured to resign after mayoral election results saw the party lose power in scores of city councils, its worst drubbing in the post-war period. Starmer promised a politics that would tread more lightly on voters' lives and would be guided by moderate policies aimed at fine-tuning the state rather than overhauling it. But this approach has been less appealing to voters than more populist messages. Reform, for instance, pledges a bigger crackdown on immigration, and the leftist Green Party pitches much greater spending paid for by taxing the rich. Half of Labour's 2024 voter base subsequently deserted the party. Starmer's government did have some notable successes, bringing down inflation, as well as cutting legal immigration and hospital waiting lists. Starmer also managed to forge an unlikely rapport with President Trump, though that didn't spare the country from being hit by U.S. tariffs. Within weeks, Starmer was beset by missteps, including disclosures that a donor had provided him and his wife with free clothing and a decision to cut a winter fuel benefit for pensioners. He then passed some of the UK's biggest tax increases in the post-war era, despite an election pledge not to do so, and increased the minimum wage, crimping business activity. The desire not to have an argument means we rarely make an argument, leaving opportunities for progress stalled and delayed. Jess Phillips, a Labour minister in charge of safeguarding women and preventing violence against children, said in her resignation letter this year, "Decency is vital. Calm curiosity is also needed, but so too are fight and drive required. Have a row, push back, make arguments, bring people along." In Shift, U.S. lets Iran sell its oil in dollars. Decision temporarily revoked sanctions. Vance says nuclear inspectors to return. The U.S. cleared the way for Iran to sell oil in dollars, including to U.S. buyers, a reversal that came as Vice President J.D. Vance said Tehran had agreed to allow nuclear inspectors to return as early as this week. The Treasury Department on Monday waived long-standing sanctions on those sales for 2 months, while talks to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and address the issues of Iran's nuclear program and further sanctions relief proceed. For years, Iran used a shadowy network of tankers under sanctions to sell its crude, primarily to China. Iran didn't acknowledge the move to allow inspectors broader access to its sites, which would mark a significant concession by Tehran. Vance acknowledged the terms of that access still needs to be negotiated. The move signaled progress in the negotiations to wind down the war, but they rekindle concerns that Iran is getting meaningful financial relief before surrendering parts of its nuclear program. Just 36 hours earlier, the talks looked to be under pressure from the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran's announcement that it had shut the strait. Vance announced agreements to set up dispute resolution mechanisms for both those issues on Monday. Speaking at the White House on Monday, President Trump said he would attack Iran again if it failed to abide by the memorandum, even if that meant once again risking global economic collapse. Nuclear weapons supersedes depression, Trump said from the Oval Office. Depression is real bad. Nuclear weapon will cause depression much more quickly. Trump defended his diplomatic approach to Iran, claiming a deal has led to a massive resurgence in oil trade in the strait, and that Iran's frozen assets would be used to purchase U.S. farm products. Before the war, Iran's oil exports formed the central target of the U.S.-led international economic campaign to pressure the regime to accept strict limits on its nuclear program. When bombing also failed to deliver that result and Iran shut the strait, the U.S. in May imposed a blockade of Iranian ports, throttling the regime's export-dependent economy to try to get it to back down. As part of the interim truce reached last week, the U.S. lifted its blockade and agreed to let Iran sell oil and get paid for it. But the formal Treasury Department waiver on Monday adds that Iran can be paid in dollars, a boon for the regime, which is in desperate need of foreign exchange. It means Iranian banks can receive payments directly from abroad, allowing the regime to more easily repatriate its oil revenue. The move goes beyond a temporary waiver issued by the Treasury in March that allowed Iran to sell oil already at sea, but maintained sanctions on dollar transactions. The waiver suspends decades of crippling restrictions that led Tehran to rely on a shadow network of aging oil tankers to export its crude, most of which went to refineries run by Beijing. The Treasury, said Tehran, could now legitimately sell oil from vessels under sanctions, effectively legalizing, for now, its shadow fleet. The waiver also exempts Iranian entities, including its central bank, from sanctions targeting terrorist activities, not just restrictions related to Iran's nuclear work, said Miad Maleki, a former senior Treasury sanctions official who now works at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a think tank. It represents a fundamental departure from the Iran sanctions architecture Congress built over the last 2 decades. The Treasury's announcement came hours after the vice president said that Iran had invited nuclear inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency back to the country, a move he described as a major milestone and the first step in permanently ending a nuclear weapons program in Iran. Vance suggested that some conversations with inspectors could happen as soon as Monday, but didn't detail how much access they could have or, crucially, whether they would be able to visit sites attacked by the U.S. and Israel last year. There was no comment by the IAEA, whose Director General, Rafael Grossi, is at the talks in Switzerland. One of Grossi's key goals in attending was to persuade Iran to allow inspectors back to the damaged sites, people familiar with the matter said. Iranian state media reported that Tehran didn't negotiate over its nuclear file or accept any new commitments during the talks, citing officials familiar with the negotiations. Iranian hardliners pushed back against the prospect of new visits from nuclear inspectors. Such a move is against the Memorandum of Understanding and very damaging, the Tasnim news agency, which is affiliated with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, reported. Iran's foreign ministry declined to comment. The future of Iran's nuclear program, which the regime claims to be peaceful, but which involves highly enriched uranium and other efforts the U.S. and Israel said are consistent with work that would be needed to produce a bomb, is the core matter that negotiators hope to resolve. Washington wants Iran to commit to giving up its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, while Iran is seeking sanctions relief for its beleaguered economy and insists it has the right to enrich. Vance said his delegation and the Iranian side, led by Parliament Speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf, had moved closer to resolving thorny issues related to Lebanon, where Israel is fighting Hezbollah militants, a conflict that has tripped up the progress toward a permanent peace and the movement of ships through the strait. Negotiators, he said, had agreed to a mechanism to avoid a new escalation in Lebanon, where fighting flared up in recent days. The first clause of the document, agreeing to a temporary U.S.-Iran truce, insists on an ending to the fighting in Lebanon as a precondition. The vice president said a so-called deconfliction system, brokered by Pakistan and Qatar, was designed to ensure Hezbollah no longer attacks Israel, strikes to which he said Israel had felt compelled to respond by ensuring all sides were engaged with one another. He said he had told Iran to curb its militant proxy, but had also been in constant contact with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and the Emirati and Saudi leaderships. The vice president also confirmed an agreement on a mechanism for communication between the U.S. and Iran in the strait so there wouldn't be any further disruption or escalation in the vital waterway. After the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran's 3 main nuclear sites last June, the IAEA's inspectors left Iran, where they had maintained a permanent rotating team because of the danger and haven't been allowed back on a permanent basis since. Iran has since allowed inspectors back into the country for visits to several Iranian locations, including the country's Bushehr nuclear reactor, but they have been barred from visiting the damaged sites of Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. Having inspectors back at those sites would be crucial for several reasons. It would allow the IAEA to get a sense of the extent of damage done by the strikes and whether there is any possibility Tehran could use the locations to begin enriching uranium again. U.S. officials have said they believe Iran isn't currently enriching uranium, which is a critical component of a civilian and nuclear weapons program. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Greenspan, whose strong Fed legacy was later dimmed, dies. Alan Greenspan, who started life as a shy only child of a single mother, transcended the role of central banker, exercising extraordinary influence over U.S. finance and commerce and enjoying unparalleled global stature during a period of remarkable prosperity. But by the time of his death at age 100, the 2008 to 2009 global financial crisis had recast his aura of technocratic omnipotence. Former colleagues and Nobel laureate Milton Friedman hailed Greenspan as the greatest central banker of all time when he finished 18 and a half years as Federal Reserve Chairman in 2006. Just 2 years later, the financial crisis triggered an austere reappraisal of his record. His view that markets could effectively police themselves became a driving force of regulatory policy in the 1990s and early 2000s. Greenspan devoted his professional life to understanding how the U.S. economy worked, first as a private sector forecaster when the U.S. was emerging as the post-war economic superpower. Later, as technology, global trade, and financialization refashioned business, he achieved a level of fame and influence rivaled only by U.S. presidents. Greenspan, the second longest-serving Fed chairman, just behind William McChesney Martin, 1951 to 1970, husbanded that power to build up the central bank's political independence. Greenspan was an enigma, a savvy political operator and ladies' man who was also an introvert. He was a skilled saxophonist who devoured books about titans of finance and industry. An advisor to Republican presidents, he got along famously with Democratic President Bill Clinton and his economic advisors. Greenspan is survived by his wife, journalist Andrea Mitchell. In a statement, she said that Greenspan had died at their home on Monday from complications from Parkinson's disease. In 1959, the libertarian Greenspan warned of how central banks could allow markets to think the business cycle had been tamed, breeding complacency and risk-taking by investors. His early academic work declared the Fed one of the historic disasters in American history, according to Sebastian Mallaby's biography, The Man Who Knew. But as chairman, he molded the Fed as a bulwark against instability. His perceived inclination to stem market panic earned a moniker, the Greenspan put, as if the Fed itself was a put option that insured investors against losses. The Fed cushioned the stock market crash of 1987, and the 1998 failure of long-term capital management was key to a bailout that followed the Mexican debt crisis of 1994. Greenspan cast a spell over Wall Street whenever he testified on Capitol Hill. With sad brown eyes, he offered drab, wordy pronouncements in a gentle voice. "Since I've become a central banker, I've learned to mumble with great incoherence," he quipped at one of his first hearings in 1987. "If I seem unduly clear to you, you must have misunderstood what I said." In the 1990s, he reached rockstar heights while the U.S. charted a long economic expansion. Pressed over whether he'd keep Greenspan as Fed chairman during a GOP presidential debate in 2000, then Senator John McCain of Arizona said, "Not only would I reappoint him, but if he died, we'd prop him up and put sunglasses on him as they did in the movie Weekend at Bernie's." Craving escape. Alan Greenspan was born on March 6, 1926 in New York. His father, Herbert, was a self-educated stockbroker. Greenspan's parents split when he was young, and his mother, Rose, raised him. A young Alan didn't have a close relationship with his father, who had immigrated as Chaim Grunspan to Ellis Island in 1906 at age 4. But Alan solidified his dream of a bigger life after accompanying Herbert on a business trip to Chicago in the late 1930s. On the train journey through steel country, he watched with awe the huge industrial furnaces that belched smoke and fire. He began collecting train schedules, but didn't dare tell his mother why. "It was her world that I was escaping," he wrote in his 2007 memoir. Greenspan excelled at the clarinet and attended George Washington High School. He wasn't allowed to join the Army after doctors found a spot on his lung that looked like tuberculosis. Instead, he took music classes at Juilliard and played in dance bands. After the war, he earned an economics degree at New York University. A largely self-taught economist, he founded a successful economic forecasting firm in the 1950s. Business clients included Mobil Oil and Alcoa. In 1957, Greenspan burnished his reputation when he warned the chief executive of a large steel company that inventories were oversaturated and a recession was likely. The CEO apologized the following year for ignoring Greenspan's correct prediction. Business success derailed his studies for an economics PhD at Columbia under Arthur Burns. Over the next 2 decades, Burns would regularly tease Greenspan over how little progress he had made writing a thesis. Greenspan earned his doctorate in 1977 after NYU accepted a collection of previously published articles as his thesis. Though he advised Richard Nixon's presidential campaign in 1968, Greenspan resisted entreaties to serve in the White House. That is, until advisors, chiefly Burns, by then the Fed chairman, prevailed on him in 1974. Greenspan's Senate confirmation hearing to serve as chairman of the Council of Economic Advisers on the afternoon of August 8, 1974, was a few hours before Nixon announced his resignation. Greenspan's views had been heavily shaped in the 1960s when he was part of the intellectual circle that gathered every week at the Manhattan apartment of libertarian philosopher Ayn Rand. The two were introduced by a friend of Greenspan's first wife, Joan Mitchell, an art historian from Canada. Mitchell and Greenspan married in 1952, but divorced after less than a year. A bachelor for much of his life, Greenspan dated newswoman Barbara Walters in the 1970s. When a gossip column publicized their relationship in 1974, President Ford forwarded it to his chief of staff with a note, "I don't believe it." He and Andrea Mitchell began dating in 1984 and became a power couple fixture. Greenspan overcame his bashfulness in 1987 to ask Nancy Reagan, who frowned on unwed couples at formal events, if his invitation to a White House state dinner could include Mitchell as his guest. Ruth Bader Ginsburg presided over their wedding in 1997. The Fed years. When President Reagan tapped Greenspan to succeed Paul Volcker as Fed chairman in 1987, an administration official told the New York Times, "If you think that Volcker was the master of obfuscation, wait until you hear Allen." Greenspan's reluctance to cut interest rates more aggressively after the 1990-91 recession led to an especially icy relationship with Treasury Secretary Nick Brady. Years later, Bush blamed Greenspan for his 1992 election loss. "I reappointed him, and he disappointed me," Bush said coldly. After the election, but before Bill Clinton had been sworn in, Greenspan flew to Little Rock to meet the incoming president. The two hit it off immediately. In all, Greenspan was appointed 5 times by 4 different presidents. Greenspan delighted in his ability to keep markets and politicians on their toes by wrapping his views in complex, garbled syntax. He would envision the next morning's newspaper headline as he spoke to Congress. "On occasion, when I realized I'm halfway through a sentence and I don't want to complete that sentence, I would roam off almost irrelevantly because I didn't care what the transcript said," he said in a 2009 interview with Fed staff. Despite such inscrutability, Greenspan initiated a decades-long glasnost, pulling back the curtain on the Fed's mystique. Until 1994, the Fed hadn't announced rate changes, but that February, Greenspan told colleagues he wanted to issue a statement to signal the beginning of a series of rate increases. Greenspan nurtured his reputation as a policy-setting maestro with 2 bold calls in the 1990s. The first was in 1994, when the Fed launched a preemptive strike on inflation that would push the federal funds rate target to 6% from 3% in 1 year. Bond investors faced huge losses. California's Orange County went bankrupt. Mexico devalued its peso. But the U.S. economy achieved a so-called soft landing. A few years later, Greenspan earned plaudits again for resisting pressure from colleagues to raise rates aggressively as the unemployment rate tested 30-year lows. Greenspan marshaled data to suggest a productivity boom because of personal computing was underway. A blind spot. Greenspan's faith that self-discipline would effectively equilibrate financial markets proved to be his blind spot. He conducted monetary policy like a maestro, said Alan Blinder, a Princeton economics professor who served as vice chairman at the Fed under Greenspan in the 1990s. But his regulatory legacy was different. It caused a lot of harm, Blinder said. Greenspan believed financial institutions had a self-interest in not taking risks that would wipe out shareholders. Similarly, he thought they had natural incentives to behave ethically to preserve their reputations. Under Greenspan's watch, the Fed didn't blow the whistle on riskier lending practices in which Wall Street used financial alchemy to turn dodgy mortgages into highly rated securities. Greenspan famously warned in 1996 the stock market was getting very speculative, exhibiting irrational exuberance. The Dow Jones Industrial Average proceeded to gain more than 80% over the next 3 years. Still, he concluded the Fed shouldn't try to prick bubbles with rate increases. When term limits forced Greenspan to retire in January 2006, the economy was solid, inflation low, and stocks and houses buoyant. But troubles were building. When home prices stopped rising, home building turned down, and delinquencies mounted on poorly underwritten mortgages. In a 2007 interview with the Wall Street Journal, former Fed Governor Ed Gromlich said he had privately urged Greenspan to clamp down on predatory lending around 2000. He was opposed to it, so I didn't really pursue it, Gromlich said. Fed leaders and other regulators didn't understand risks from innovations such as the securitization of credit. Many blamed the deregulation of and self-regulation by Wall Street, championed by Greenspan and presidents of both parties. Greenspan thought he received disproportionate blame for the crisis, together with undue credit for the economic boom of the late 1990s. I was praised for things I didn't do, he said in a 2008 interview. I am now being blamed for things I didn't do. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. NTSB probes crash of Tesla into home. U.S. auto safety regulators have opened an investigation into a fatal wreck involving a Tesla that crashed into a home Friday evening and killed one person inside. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the top auto regulator in the country, said Monday that it would examine a crash involving a Tesla Model 3 near Houston. The driver of the Tesla told police he was operating with an automated driving assistance system, according to a statement by the Harris County Sheriff's Office. The vehicle left the roadway, entered through the brick residence at a high rate of speed, and struck a woman who was inside, sheriff's officials said. The woman, Martha Avila, later died from injuries sustained in the crash, officials said. Footage from a home camera that was posted on social media and shared with the Wall Street Journal shows the blue Model 3 speeding up to the house in Katy, Texas, crossing over the yard and driveway and slamming into the front wall of the home. NHTSA on Monday said it was launching a special crash investigation into the incident. The regulator's division that handles such investigations opens more than 100 cases annually to examine incidents involving unique circumstances or outcomes from an engineering perspective, according to NHTSA's website. Tesla didn't return a request for comment. The incident marks the latest effort by NHTSA to examine Tesla's suite of advanced driver assistance technologies. The agency has been conducting a defect investigation of Tesla's system known as full self-driving, supervised, which controls driving and steering functions but requires drivers to continuously monitor the road. Defect probes can result in automakers conducting a safety recall. Tesla charges owners a $99 monthly subscription to use full self-driving. It wasn't clear if the driver's vehicle had full self-driving engaged. Justices to rule on Trump's power. Ever since President Trump returned to office in January 2025, he and the Supreme Court have been locked in an uneasy tango. Now the tempo is about to quicken. Over the next 2 weeks, the court will race to hear its docket before the justices take their annual summer break. 4 remaining cases involve Trump's aggressive efforts to expand his own power. In at least a couple of them, the justices seem inclined to rein him in. What the court says and how it says it will help define its relationship with a pugnacious president for the remainder of his time in office. The justices are weighing whether Trump can redefine birthright citizenship, fire a governor of the Federal Reserve, consolidate power over independent agencies, and strip protections from hundreds of thousands of immigrants. Though the 4 cases turn on different legal issues, together they will send a strong signal about how far the court's conservative majority is willing to let Trump go, legal experts say. There's a growing number of people who think that the court is just a rubber stamp for Trump, said Stephen Wormile, a law professor at American University. I don't know if the court cares about that perception or not, but this would be the moment to say that they're still engaging in their own constitutional interpretation and not simply taking the president's cue. So far, in Trump's second term, the court has largely been receptive to Trump's claims of executive authority. Over the past year and a half, it has used short reform emergency rulings to allow an array of controversial Trump policies to take effect immediately, even after lower courts tried to block them. But the justices also drew two red lines. Last December, in a cautiously worded yet consequential unsigned order, the court blocked Trump from sending the National Guard into Chicago. 2 months later, in a full-throated decision written by Chief Justice John Roberts, it struck down Trump's global tariffs. Perhaps the biggest clash is the case over birthright citizenship. The justices are assessing the legality of Trump's executive order declaring that children born on U.S. soil won't be considered American citizens if their parents are undocumented immigrants or temporary visitors. When the court heard the case in April, justices on both sides of the ideological spectrum voiced unease about Trump's bid to unilaterally redefine the Constitution's guarantee of birthright citizenship. Trump himself has predicated that he will lose the case. Some experts caution that a decision repudiating Trump's arguments on birthright citizenship wouldn't on its own indicate the court is growing more hostile to Trump or becoming more moderate. Those arguments are so far out there that simply preserving the status quo is not a serious check on Trump's power, said Elizabeth Wydra, president of the left-leaning Constitutional Accountability Center. Conservatives are looking at a few other divisive cases that remain pending as the justices try to wrap up their work before July 4th. The court will soon decide whether states can ban transgender women and girls from competing on female sports teams. It also will rule on major cases in which Republicans are challenging a key campaign finance law and extended deadlines for mail-in ballots. As for the remaining Trump-related cases, the president is likely to come away with a mixed record. Supreme Court watchers think the court will probably rule against him on his attempt to fire Lisa Cook, a member of the Fed's Board of Governors. The question is how much the court will say. A broad ruling could deliver strong legal protections for the independence of the Fed. A narrow ruling could allow Cook to remain in her job while skirting deeper questions about the president's authority over monetary policy and bank regulation. Trump seems poised to win a different dispute over his firing power. Whether he can remove, for any reason, the heads of agencies like Federal Trade Commission. Congress structured those agencies to sit at arm's length from the president, but the conservative justices have repeatedly signaled they believe that sort of structure interferes with the president's authority over the executive branch. The outcome in the final remaining case on presidential power is the toughest to predict. The case tests Trump's attempt to rescind a program known as Temporary Protected Status, which Congress established to allow immigrants who are already in the U.S. to remain here legally if their home countries are facing war or humanitarian disasters. The Trump administration has argued that courts have virtually no role in supervising the president's decisions about who qualifies for the program. The nerviest race at the World Cup, Iran's sprint to leave U.S. soil. At precisely 2 p.m. here on Sunday, the 31 members of Iran's traveling party to this World Cup heard the final whistle and gathered in the center of the pitch. Over more than 90 minutes against Belgium, one of the top 10 sides in the world, Iran's defense had bent without breaking. Its goalkeeper had been heroic. Most importantly, the country that was so nearly uninvited from the tournament knew it remained alive at America's World Cup. But as one nerve-wracking challenge ended, another was only beginning. Iran was to leave the country immediately, and the next 90 minutes would be just as stressful. "We don't ask for much," Iran captain Al-Reza Jahanbakhsh said after the 0-0 draw. "We just ask for the same procedures as the 47 other teams." Under the terms of the national team's deal with FIFA and the U.S. government, Iran and its skeleton crew of support staff are only allowed on American soil for roughly 24 hours at a time. So instead of recovering at a hotel after matches, as the other 47 have the option to do, the team must scramble to the airport and catch a charter flight back to its base camp in Tijuana, Mexico. After Iran's first match, the players had been rushed out so quickly that they hardly had time to cool down. The team physio had to finish treating his banged up team on the plane. Everything is like a disaster, forward Mehdi Taremi had said. On Sunday at SoFi Stadium, the whole choreography unfolded again. Iran's players strode out together from the Los Angeles Chargers locker room and made their way to a bus to LAX. They were due to take off at 4:30, an ambitious target for a game that ended at 2 p.m. By the time Iran's Airbus 320 was finally wheels up, it was 5:48. 32 minutes later, Team Melli, as it is known, was beyond American airspace and touching down south of the border. They went directly back to the Tijuana Marriott, where they reunited with the members of staff who weren't granted U.S. visas. Together, they had already spent more than 2 weeks in the hotel, monitored by police and the Mexican National Guard. They have not been allowed to leave except for matches and practice. Such behavior is not suitable for a World Cup, Iran's coach Amir Galnoy said. You invite a team, but you don't let in their backroom staff? It just shows that we are an oppressed country. The U.S. insists that these measures, which also prevent the team from flying in before the eve of a match, are absolutely essential. Andrew Giuliani, the executive director of the White House's World Cup Task Force, said that some of the staff members who weren't allowed in had direct ties to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Our national security comes first, he added, noting that plenty of other squads also choose to fly out straight after games. Iran had been one of the first countries to qualify for this World Cup, but for Team Melli to make the trip at all, it required an executive order from President Trump overriding his own ban on travelers from Iran. The squad had been due to base itself in Tucson, Arizona, until it found itself in the unprecedented position of going to a World Cup hosted by a country that was actively bombing its compatriots. It took FIFA and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum to step in at the last minute with the Tijuana solution. We suffer from mental fatigue as well, midfielder Sayed Azatoli said. You cannot deny that our situation hasn't been the same as the other teams. And yet, Iran still has a chance to reach the knockout rounds, despite traveling back and forth without key staff, relying on extra medics and kit men on loan from FIFA in America. The players have avoided defeat in their first 2 matches against New Zealand and Belgium. They will advance to the round of 32 if they can beat Egypt on Friday in Seattle. Giuliani said that the government would consider tweaking its rule to allow Iran to arrive 2 days before the game instead of 1. The sprint back to Mexico, however, would remain unchanged. The wonderful people of Tijuana, they made us feel at home, Azatoli said, and they've tried to make up for the hurdles that other people have caused us at this World Cup. For Iran's fans in America, the whole adventure has been one long exercise in historical dissonance. Earlier this month, protesters gathered outside Los Angeles City Hall to argue that the country should be kicked out of the World Cup for killing dissidents back home. Even the members of Southern California's enormous Iranian diaspora in the stands were conflicted. They booed the anthem, cheered for the players, and wielded flags bearing Iran's pre-revolutionary emblems of a lion and sun, which FIFA attempted to ban as a political symbol. Each time they far outnumbered the Kiwi and Belgian contingents, and it wasn't lost on the players. We play for all the Iranians, Jahan Bakash said, inside Iran and outside Iran. Why the iPhone's pricing power is unmatched. One reason Apple can raise product prices so confidently, the iPhone has wiped out the competition for the world's wealthiest smartphone buyers. Costlier memory chips prompted Apple chief executive Tim Cook to tell the Wall Street Journal that price increases were unavoidable. Fortunately for Cook, no other major smartphone maker has a customer base that can so easily afford a steeper price tag. Here's a look at Apple's near monopoly with the world's deepest pocketed buyers. Apple has competition on raw volume, representing 1 in 5 of the roughly 1.3 billion smartphones shipped last year. That's a similar market share to Samsung Electronics and not far ahead of Xiaomi. But it's a different story with phones that bring in the biggest profits. The smartphone industry typically defines a premium device as one priced at $600 or above. In that space, Apple controls more than 2/3 of the market. The iPhone's dominance grows as the price moves higher. For phones priced at $1,000 or more, Apple captures more than 3/4 of the market. Only a few rivals exist at that level, such as Samsung's top-line Galaxy S25 Ultra, Huawei's Mate X6, and Google's Pixel 10 Pro XL. Thanks to its pricing power, Apple captures the overwhelming majority of the industry's gross profits. Most smartphones are sold at razor-thin profit margins, though they provide the manufacturer's other benefits. To Samsung, its mid-tier or budget phones help sustain its affiliates' components business. A Xiaomi phone can connect to its electric vehicles and other household products. Apple sells mostly high-end devices, and its profit margins dwarf everyone else's. The company didn't respond to requests for comment. Apple's latest iPhones ranked as the industry's 3 best-selling smartphone models in the first quarter of this year. Even a year-old model, the iPhone 16, cracked the top 5. Roughly a decade ago, Samsung ran closer to Apple in the US, but now iPhones have opened up a wide lead in one of Apple's cash cow iPhone markets, with a market share of roughly 60%. Virtually all Apple smartphone peers have recently pushed through price increases because of rising component costs. That sticker shock means shipments in the industry are projected to drop by a double-digit percentage this year. About 3/4 of smartphones shipped worldwide sell for under $600. One exception, the premium segment, is expected to have modest growth. The forecast predates Apple's making public its plans to boost pricing. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Mars gives M&M's a Maha makeover. M&M's will mark a milestone in the candy's 85-year history in August, debuting a version made without artificial dyes. The bags of chocolate will also be missing 2 hallmarks, the colors brown and blue. Under pressure from Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his Make America Healthy Again campaign, M&M's maker Mars pledged to offer options for some of its iconic products without those dyes this year. The chocolate giant planned instead to color the foods with dyes derived from natural sources. The task is proving much harder and more expensive than it sounds. Blue and brown are among a half-dozen classic M&M's colors. Mars researchers figured out how to deliver convincing replicas of its red, orange, and yellow candies using natural ingredients like beets and turmeric. Blue, which Mars added to the mix in 1995, was a different story. That color was proving arduous to recreate affordably and at scale. The company also couldn't reliably churn out brown M&Ms, which it turns out include a fair bit of blue. Blame algae. Mars chose spirulina, a high-protein ingredient often touted as a superfood, as a blue substitute, but it has been gumming up the U.S. factories that produce 600 million M&Ms each day. Inside Mars' corporate office in Newark, New Jersey, employees have spent months debating the plan for natural colors. They mulled launching a 3-color mix with red, orange, and yellow M&Ms, but the sunset vibes were too strong. 4 colors would be better, but which one could they add? Purple, it found, also required too much spirulina. Pink didn't look right. No pop of color, Mars said. Mars could have delayed the rollout until it was able to replicate M&M's full rainbow, but executives wanted to press ahead, said Anton Vincent, who leads the company's North American snack business. Executives brought their plan to Mars board, where directors, including members of the Mars family, the private billionaire clan that owns the company, queried them about discussions with consumers and retailers. The brand generates billions of dollars in annual sales, after all. It was a daunting situation, Vincent said. You're messing with an 85-year-old icon. Mars deliberations underscore how demands from the Trump administration's MAHA agenda and its supporters are crashing into scientific and business realities for the nation's biggest food companies. The company pledged in 2016 to cut artificial dyes from all of its human food, but it changed course for candy, saying many consumers weren't worried about the dyes in those products. Kennedy has pushed food companies to remove artificial dyes, blaming them for a range of health problems, especially in children. Food companies have defended their use of dyes, citing approvals from regulatory bodies, but backlash intensified with states passing their own bans. Last July, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton launched an investigation into Mars for alleged deceptive trade practices tied to artificial dyes. A week later, Mars made its new pledge, which the company said was already in the works when the investigation was announced. Across Mars offices and plants in New Jersey, Tennessee, and Kansas, some 100 employees are working on its natural color efforts. 1/4 of them are dedicated solely to blue, said Claire Hewitt, a Mars veteran overseeing the multi-million-dollar initiative, who has dubbed herself its chief color officer. Nature produces few truly blue plants and minerals, making blue the holy grail of natural food dyes, said Paul Manning, chief executive of dye manufacturer Sentient Technologies. Companies have scoured the globe in search of raw materials to create a natural blue food color that can withstand changes to heat, light, and pH. They have experimented with juice from jagua, a fruit found in Central and South America, and petals from the butterfly pea flower in Southeast Asia. And they have studied spirulina, an organism that some people affectionately call pond scum. A single chocolate M&M takes 12 hours to make. To do it, Mars blends sugar, cocoa, and other ingredients into a mixture that hardens into the candy's solid core. The lentils, as Mars calls them, are then doused in a sugary coating and loaded into huge rotating drums or pans to be colored. Inside, M&Ms tumble as a row of sprayers paint the candy shells with dyes like blue 1. Spirulina, Mars decided, offered the best match for blue 1, but the ingredient comes with a host of problems. To get anywhere close to what Hewitt called blue M&M's cerulean hue, Mars must use about 7 times the amount of colorant. Even then, naturally blue M&Ms are lighter, resembling a robin's egg. Unlike blue 1, spirulina arrives at Mars' doorstep as a powder. It can foam when mixed with a sugary syrup, resulting in a smoothie-like mixture versus a liquid, Mars said. The more viscous material can clog up factory spray nozzles, resulting in spotty, unevenly colored candy. What's more, spirulina leaves a sticky film, akin to dental plaque, inside the pipes that snake through Mars plants, threatening to build up and cause mold, a food safety hazard. All this means that Mars must upgrade more than 300 machines across its M&M plants to handle spirulina. It's the hardest thing I've had to do in my career, Hewitt said. Hitmaker reshaped music industry. Clive Davis, the hit-making record producer, the music titan who helped develop superstar performers for more than half a century, has died at 94. He died from age-related illness at his Manhattan home on Monday, a representative for the family said. Davis championed a new generation of rock at Columbia Records in the late 1960s before shepherding a slate of stars across R&B, hip-hop, country, and pop, starting with his own fabled Arista Records. With no musical training, Davis became a potent record executive thanks to his negotiating skills and legendary golden ears for spotting hits. He shaped the careers of artists as a producer and advisor with financial acumen, a taste for popular music across genres, and a willingness to encourage creative freedom. He is one of a few non-performers inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Davis recognized a movement that would change the record business, said former Rolling Stone editor Fred Goodman during the executive's 2000 induction. Underground, album-oriented rock was giving birth to artists whose creativity, longevity, and widespread commercial appeal would at least equal that of established mainstream performers. And indeed ultimately become the mainstream. Davis's pre-Grammy charity gala, held the night before the awards every year since 1975, attracted hundreds of artists, executives, politicians, and celebrities. Music man's start. Born in Brooklyn, New York in 1932, Davis moved in with his sister in Queens after becoming an orphan in his teens. He graduated from New York University and received a full scholarship to Harvard Law School. Davis entered the music business as general counsel of Columbia Records, where he became president in 1967. The lawyer turned music man transformed the label into a rock and roll powerhouse after attending the Monterey International Pop Festival, where he saw the commercial potential of rock and landed Janis Joplin. In addition to signing Santana, Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, Aerosmith, Pink Floyd, and Earth, Wind & Fire, he had a hand in the work of Simon and Garfunkel, Bob Dylan, Barbra Streisand, and Miles Davis. Davis helped change the way records were sold. Early in his career, most albums were sold in two versions, mono and a more expensive stereo format, a practice he described as expensive and wasteful in his autobiography. At Columbia, Davis decided to sell both versions of the albums at the higher stereo price, $4.79, helping lead the demise of mononaural records. He tested variable pricing, offering some albums with high demand, including The Graduate soundtrack and Simon and Garfunkel's Bookends, for $1 more. Both moves proved profitable for Columbia and the artists. Still, Davis recalled the artists were upset about the higher price tag. In that countercultural heyday, it struck them as a hard-nosed business establishment-style decision, which I suppose it was. Davis's Columbia stint ended when he was fired in 1973 for allegedly using tens of thousands of dollars in company funds to pay for personal expenses, including his son's bar mitzvah. In his memoir, he denied expensing the party, blamed another executive for falsifying invoices, and said he felt vindicated after pleading guilty to a single tax evasion charge involving a trip to Jamaica. He and Columbia Pictures joined forces in 1974 to launch Arista, which had a streak of smashes starting with Barry Manilow's Mandy. Davis said he tussled with Manilow, who balked at recording cover songs, wanting to write music himself. When the executive, who compromised by choosing 2 cover songs for every album, while Manilow wrote the rest, picked I Write the Songs, he said. Manilow didn't speak to him for months. The recording remains Manilow's most popular. Finding Whitney. Davis first heard 19-year-old Whitney Houston, who grew up singing in a gospel choir at a New York City nightclub in 1983. Davis was stunned as she sang The Greatest Love of All, an R&B hit he commissioned years earlier for Muhammad Ali biopic The Greatest, and offered her a recording contract. Under Davis's watch, Arista also launched the careers of Patti Smith, Kenny G, Sarah McLachlan, and Dido, and attracted high-profile artists including Aretha Franklin, The Grateful Dead, Diane Warwick, and Carly Simon. Davis helped from LaFace Records with L.A. Reid and Babyface in 1989. The joint venture's roster exploded with hits from TLC, Usher, Outkast, and Pink. Another joint venture in 1994 with Sean Combs resulted in Bad Boy Records, home to the notorious B.I.G. Davis left Arista in 2000 and formed J Records with backing from Arista parent Bertelsmann Music Group, scoring more hits with Alicia Keys, Maroon 5, Annie Lennox, and Rod Stewart.